Hey everyone, this is James here from Italian Poliziotteschi and Jolly Reviews. Today I am going to be reviewing Tony Arzenta, aka No Way Out, aka Big Guns. So several titles for this one. This is one of those Eurocrime films that was released kind of in the heyday of Poliziotteschi ones. And you can tell that this has a little bit of a bigger budget. Brought on a Duccio Tessari film pretty recently, Bloodstained Butterflies. This comes out just a couple of years later, 1973. So quick synopsis. Mafia hitman Tony Arzenta wants to retire. His bosses decide to kill him instead, but end up killing his wife and kid by mistake. So that's kind of in the first bit. I do spoil the films here, so please do note that before watching. I first saw this film in 2020 when I was kind of doing my initial run of Eurocrime films, and I really liked the film then. And Radiance seems to, my tastes tend to coincide with a lot of the films that Radiance is restoring. So the Damiani films, this is another one that they've done. And I think very happy to see that. And so I bought the Blu-ray, and I think it looks great, and I love it just as much in 2024. And I do think, perhaps more than your average Poliziottesco film, this is one that does benefit from having a little bit more of that restoration and that care put in, because it looks fantastic. A lot of the sets, the cinematography, I think, are a little bit they're exemplary in this film. Should and why to watch this film? I think it's absolutely worth watching if you're a fan of Eurocrime films. This is one of those films that doesn't reinvent the wheel at all, but it expands the scope. There's a little bit more of a jet-setting mentality here, and it just feels bigger. The hierarchy of the mafia or the criminal organizations are bigger, and it executes things very well. You have a top-tier star in Delon, and the set pieces and things like that really stand out. And I think thanks to the Radiance films, Blu-ray now, everything looks fantastic as well. And so I think that's kind of like the main point I would say about this film is it has a lot of those elements that you're going to get from kind of a Fernando De Leo film too. It is very noir-y. In fact, going from Blood and Diamonds over to this, it's kind of interesting. They're both focused on sort of the hierarchy of the mafia, and they're interested in a little bit of that internal dynamics going on. Even some of the sets feel very similar to a De Leo film. Some stuff like the Junkyard definitely brings to mind something like Italian Connection, as well as kind of some of the general tropes of the genre. It's particularly brutal towards women. There's a really brutal beating here, so that's kind of a warning if that stuff really does bother you quite a bit. I think as a whole it's pretty effective, and I think you could actually even say that those things are part of kind of like one of the core themes throughout the film. One of the characters, perhaps the only character that doesn't treat women really horribly in the film, is Elaine Delon. And so you could tell that, it contrasts that with some of like the really nastiness that some of these mafia bosses will take out on their women, including beating and torture and stuff like that. So in that sense, it's one that doesn't pull its punches at all. I do think this is very stylish, and I think that's reflected in a couple ways. I think the Tessari has a great eye for shots, and it's interesting going from Bloodstained Butterfly, which I would say goes from more of maybe his subdued and subtle instincts. Again, a very handsome film in its own right, but not necessarily as grand. This one feels like almost like more of a giallo in terms of like an Argento giallo. Like there's reds that are popping. It's very colorful at different times. We do go to Northern Europe at some times, and it does get kind of more of that foggy feel to it. So I think, the blood is kind of that paint red blood, so it pops a lot. There's slow-mo, so in a lot of ways this is the more stylish film, I would say, than something like Bloodstained Butterflies. And I think part of that is just because maybe the budget's a little bit larger, you're working with a bigger star here. The film was lensed by Silvano Ippoliti, who probably the most famous film he has done is Great Silence. There's just a great feel to the different style and the things that are happening there. This is also one of those films, sort of like a De Leo film, where we examine sort of the inter-Italian politics too, or at least the different areas. In a lot of those De Leo films, they talk about kind of the different people kind of migrating up from southern Italy, where it's a little bit poorer, so places like Naples and Sicily, to like Milan, where a lot of those stories take place. The Damiani ones are set in southern Italy, so this one has that same dynamic going on too, where we have Elaine Delon's character, Tony Arzenta, is from Sicily, and so he kind of has we have several scenes set in Sicily. We kind of come and go because he is from there, so we get introduced to his family just a little bit there. And then we also even go to Northern Europe, which is kind of fun because I enjoy seeing Copenhagen. I've been to Sweden a couple of times, so it really reminds me of that. We even get a great car chase through there, so that is really interesting to see too. So definitely more of kind of like moving around Europe, moving to different places, which is not something you're typically going to see. That reminds me a little bit more of maybe like the Lindsay Baker Jolly, where they're kind of like showing that jet set middle to upper class lifestyle. In this sense, these criminals are not low level criminals. They're actually fairly high up. So, I mean, I've seen more than a few people compare this film to John Wick, and in a way it makes a lot of sense. Even the stars are both kind of very subdued in their state. They're both very understated, and a lot more is made out of like their presence, even though they're perhaps softer and a little bit kinder than kind of the antagonists of the film. The southern Italian feel really does give vibes of kind of like the Italian scenes of The Godfather. Even we are using some of the cast members from The Godfather there, so that is also kind of interesting as well. I'd say another thing that really stands out here are the set pieces. The hits are appropriately very well staged and brutal. It reminds me a little bit of kind of Argento staging his murder set pieces. You can tell that they're planned with kind of care. So even just the times when he kind of walks through a steam room and something like that, or shoots a boss, that sort of thing, I think those are well thought through, and I think they're consistently interesting. The bombing of his family is also one thing that really, really stands out. That one is a very brutal scene to see. Because we see him kind of looking throughout the window, and you can sort of see it happening just because, we're used to genre tropes and whatnot. And so the scene really takes its time and is very patient in letting that happen. I mean, Tessari just injects everything through different flourishes, like fish takes in exploding, someone gets shot, and then just gets brutally runs into everything throughout the train. It kind of reminds me of like Don't Torture a Duckling, where we have like the dummy death falling through. People die in very extravagant fashions that remind me a little bit more of kind of the other Italian genre that was strong at the time, giallo. One thing that I feel like people's mileage might vary a little bit is with Alain Delon. Personally, I love Delon. I think he always brings like a certain gravitas, but also presence to the film that really does suit this pretty well. Other people, I think, will find his performance to be perhaps a little bit too muted. I actually find him to be pretty effective as kind of like the emotional center of the film. Of course, because it's Delon, everything is a little bit more understated and a little more subtle. And so in listening and kind of researching different reviews of the film, I do find that some people dislike it. I'm inclined to agree with the person that did the scene-by-scene commentary here, Peter Jomstad, that he does a good job of that, and I think that is, for me at least, one thing that does set this apart and elevate it from kind of like an average Eurocrime film to be a bit better. You have not one, but two excellent car chases. One is in Copenhagen, which is a fun setting change. The other one, I think it's just in Milan, it uses great use of kind of like these big European public squares. We just have people shooting out of the machine guns there, and it has a very, very dangerous feel to it. Delon is definitely up to snuff on the action scenes, and I like the way that particularly the Copenhagen action scene develops, where it starts with him kind of getting gunned down and being manipulated by a woman who is setting him up essentially into a hit, and he eventually at some point just switches from him getting assassinated to assassinating the Copenhagen mob boss. So that's a lot of fun to see as well, just the way that it kind of strings one thing to the next. So those are a couple of like the little bit longer set pieces that happen. The car work is excellent. It's really brutal just to see these cars have like really strong head-on collisions there. I think most people know kind of the one set in Milan, maybe it's France, I'm not sure, as kind of like one of the more notable ones. I think that one's outstanding too. I think these are two of the best car chases that you're going to see in kind of like this era of film. I so much so that I was trying to research if Julien Ramy was involved, because he was involved in just a lot of these different films, specifically with car stunts. I couldn't back that up, so if someone actually knows that, I'd be curious to hear. The rest of the cast is filled with just a lot of really reliable names. You have Marc Perel, who is a brunette in this one, who is in Live Like a Cop, Die Like a Man, Don't Torture Ducklings, so kind of one of those Italian character actors that's in a lot of different films. He's playing Delon's friend. He's good here. They actually paired together previously in a French film, The Sicilian Clan, which I think is Jean Gabin too. That's a good film too. You have Richard Conti, who is kind of a reliable elderly American face that just brings a certain gravitas to them. Always very professional. I love Conti from his like earlier noirs all the way through this era, and it's too bad he passed away just a little bit after this. I think he's great in these films. Probably just getting payday, but I feel like he always does a good job just bringing his presence to the film. You also have another great face, Umberto Orsini. You have it's fun. There's a lot of different people. There's a lot of carryover from the cast from Bloodstained Butterfly to this. One other thing I did note too is that the revenge is very passive in a certain way. A lot of it is kind of forced. In fact, the hit that I was just talking about in Copenhagen is one that was not necessarily thought out and planned to meticulous details. It's more one where he senses an opportunity to execute it, and he ends up doing it right then, where he is the one that's actually being targeted. And it's interesting that the international criminal organizations here are kind of preempting him, and they're forcing the revenge on him more than he is like deliberately taking revenge. And so you can tell at certain points that he is very, very tired of it. Moving along, the music, of course, is fantastic. This is done by Johnny Ferrio, who I think also did Bloodstained Butterflies. It kind of has a nice jazzy funk feel to it. Love the soundtracks here, so this one is no exception. The violence is just brutal, and that's something I like too. Some of the songs I will note are also kind of melancholic too. And there's a couple points where Delon just does these like great jumping stab, and I think those hold up really well. I'm a big fan of Hong Kong action cinema that would happen in the next decade. For me, that's the peak of action cinema. But I think in many ways these Italian films, especially to the brutal lengths they're willing to go, hold their own. And they're doing different things there than the Cantonese would be doing a decade later. Tessari, want to shout him out. I don't think I mentioned him enough. He does a great job here. Well known for the Ringo films, Pistol for Ringo and Return for Ringo. Good Giuliano Gemma westerns, as well as a few different Jolly that he did. But for me, at least, for my money, I think this is my favorite film of his. And I just love the combination of great set pieces, a big star, and the scope and style. And so, yeah, you could tell this film has a bigger budget too, sheerly by its runtime. It goes, I think, 115, closer to the 2-hour mark than most of these. And I think it certainly justifies it with kind of the strength of its, of just the things that are going on. And also has a banger of the ending on a freeze frame, very cynical, very of the Eurocrime Polizio genre. Okay, so thank you everyone for tuning in. I'm going to give this film a 9 out of 10. I would pair this film double feature-wise. I think this would pair well with perhaps something like The Boss. So maybe like another DeLeo film that is a little bit more, the scope's a little bit smaller, but is also just a really, really fun film. That one you have Henry Silva. Okay, so thank you everyone for tuning in. I will see y'all next time.